The steel groaned around me. Not the gentle creak of an old house settling, but the low, guttural moan of metal straining under monstrous pressure. The entire hull of the destroyer USS Coronado shuddered, plunging its bow into another wall of black water, its multi-thousand-ton body trembling as tons of salt water crashed onto the deck above us. We were in the heart of a storm, caught in the middle of the vast, furious Pacific Ocean, and even here, deep inside the ship in the dimly lit briefing room, the elements made themselves known. The air was heavy, stale, thick with the smell of ozone from the humming electronics, machine oil, and the faint but pervasive scent of human sweat trapped in the confined space. "Razorback, listen up!" Commander Wallace's voice, our liaison, crackled from the speaker above the hologram, slightly distorted by static. He was back there, safe in a comfortable command center in San Diego, thousands of miles from this hell, but his voice sounded as if he were standing right beside us, looking each of us in the eye. Before me and my team, 6 of the best operators the U.S. Naval Special Warfare Command had to offer, hung a shimmering 3-dimensional map. Its bluish glow snatched our tense, focused faces from the gloom. At the map's center rotated a small, nameless speck of land, designated simply as Isla Perdida, the Lost Island. How fitting. Approximately 18 hours ago, we lost contact with the USNS Prometheus, a Pathfinder-class research vessel, Wallace continued, as the hologram helpfully zoomed in on the island, showing schematic reefs and the presumed location of the missing vessel off the northeastern tip. Last transmission was fragmented, reported a critical malfunction and an attempt to beach her right here. A red dot blinked on the map. Satellite confirmation visualizes the vessel aground, hull significantly damaged. 0 signs of life. I scanned my guys. Chief Diaz, my number 2, stood like a rock, arms crossed over his powerful chest. His face, crisscrossed with scars, souvenirs from a dozen hotspots, was unreadable. Machete wasn't just a call sign. It described his brutal efficiency in close quarters. Beside him, Doc Evans, our medic, frowned slightly, his fingers nervously fiddling with the strap of his tactical pack with the red cross. Evans was always more perceptive, noticing things the rest of us missed. On the other side of the table, Gadget Lee, our tech and comms guru, peered at the hologram as if trying to see the problem's very essence through the pixels. His fingers were already flying over a portable tablet, probably checking frequencies or studying the island's topography. Lee was a genius with tech, but his nerves sometimes frayed in the quiet before the storm. Standing slightly apart were our heavy hitters. Petty Officer Rico Davis, our machine gunner, shifted his weight from foot to foot, his massive shoulders seeming even broader under his body armor. Impatience flickered in his eyes. He preferred action to words. And finally, Hawkeye Bell, our sniper and scout, stood motionless in the shadows near the bulkhead. Quiet, methodical, he was our eyes and ears. His calm presence usually reassuring to everyone. "Your objective, Razorback," Wallace's voice hardened, "is to insert onto the island, reach the Prometheus, and retrieve priority cargo codenamed Echo. Repeat, Cargo Echo. It's in a special reinforced container in the ship's lab module. Details on the contents are classified top secret. Suffice it to say, its importance is strategic. Loss or compromise is unacceptable." Silence hung in the room, broken only by the howl of the wind outside and the hum of ventilation. Secret cargo on a research vessel in the middle of nowhere. Classic. And as always, intel was scarce as hen's teeth. "Sir, any intel on the nature of the cargo? Bio, chem hazard, radiation?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Distrust of limited intel was an occupational hazard. We needed to know what we were walking into. "Lieutenant Cole, you have all necessary information to complete the mission," Wallace cut me off. "The container is sealed and shock-resistant. Your job is retrieval. No on-site investigation. Speed and stealth are your primary allies. Questions?" There were a million questions, but asking them was pointless. We were the tool, the tip of the spear, not privy to the grand strategy. "No questions, sir," I replied. "Excellent. You have 30 minutes to prep. RIBs will launch portside. The storm is your ally. It'll provide cover from satellite observation. Move fast, Lieutenant, and good luck. Wallace out." The hologram winked out, plunging the room into near-total darkness, broken only by the red emergency lights. "Well, gentlemen, fancy a stroll in the rain?" Diaz grunted, the first to break the silence. His voice was even, but I caught the sarcastic edge. 30 minutes, let's move," I ordered. The movement became synchronized, honed by hundreds of drills. No fuss, just business-like focus. We headed for the armory, then the deployment bay. The clang of metal, the click of buckles, the checks on gear, the familiar symphony before deployment. I checked my HK 416, secured my Sig Sauer P226 sidearm to my thigh. Diaz checked his shotgun and the formidable machete that gave him his name. Lee fussed over a pack full of electronics, checking secure comms channels and a mini-drone. Evans double-checked his medical pack, ampules, bandages, tourniquets, surgical kit. I hoped he wouldn't have to use most of it. Davis lovingly wiped down his M249 SAW, draping extra belts of ammo across himself. Bell silently adjusted the optics on his MK11 Mod 0 sniper rifle. Every piece of gear, from night vision goggles to spare batteries, was checked with obsessive thoroughness. We knew, on a mission, there are no small details. Equipment failure could cost lives. Every sound, every movement was steeped in the tension hanging heavy in the air. Not fear, no. We were professionals, but a premonition of something wrong wouldn't leave me. This nameless island, the secret cargo, the lost ship. Too many unknowns. The atmosphere of secrecy around Cargo Echo was thicker than the fog of war. The launch was hell. Our two RIBs, rigid hull inflatable boats, swung on the davits like toys before crashing into the churning blackness with a deafening splash. Engines roared, and we tore away from the bulk of the destroyer, which instantly became a distant light swallowed by the wall of rain and spray. The wind howled, waves crashed over the gunwales, drenching us in icy water. The RIB bucked on the crests, slamming down into the troughs between waves with a jarring crash. We held on tight, faces hidden beneath helmets and balaclavas, but I saw Lee's knuckles whiten as he gripped the handhold. He hated water, especially like this. The irony for a Navy SEAL. Our small squad raced through the raging storm toward the island, which, even through the curtain of rain, looked like a dark, malevolent smudge on the horizon. An island that had already swallowed one ship. An island holding the secret cargo Echo. And I had a very bad feeling about what exactly would answer our arrival there. The storm outside was horrific, but I feared it was nothing compared to what awaited us on Isla Perdida. The roar of the engines and the howl of the wind merged into a deafening cacophony, but beneath the noise I thought I heard something else. A low, vibrating hum, seeming to come from the ocean itself. Or from the island ahead. Waves slammed into the RIB with the fury of a crazed beast. Salt spray stung my face despite the helmet and balaclava. Rain lashed down almost horizontally, turning visibility into a patchwork quilt of gray and black. The island loomed closer. A dark, shapeless mass crowned with ragged shreds of fog clinging to unseen peaks like funeral shrouds. Even from afar, it radiated a primal menace. Not a single light, no sign of human presence. Only cliffs where the surf crashed with a roar, and a dense wall of jungle receding into darkness. We headed for the insertion point Lee had selected based on satellite data. A small cove east of the Prometheus wreck site, relatively sheltered from the direct impact of the waves by a rocky headland. The engines throttled down, shifting to a quiet approach. The storm's fury subsided slightly, replaced by the dull roar of the surf and the ominous rustle of rain on the water and the boat's inflatable hull. "Shoreline 200 meters out!" Diaz's calm voice came over the headset from the second RAIB. "Got eyes on a suitable landing spot. Rocks, but looks manageable." "Roger that, Machete. Following you in. Everyone prepare for landing," I replied. The last few meters were tough. Waves tried to hurl the boats onto sharp black rocks jutting from the water like dragon's teeth. The pilots fought the elements, carefully guiding us toward a narrow strip of pebble beach. With a dull thud, we hit the shore. "Go, go, go!" We leaped into the waist-deep freezing water, instantly feeling its drag trying to pull us off our feet. We hauled the RHIBs higher onto the pebbles, as far as our strength allowed, and quickly camouflaged them under overhanging rocks and storm-tossed driftwood. The work was silent, coordinated. Everyone knew their job. When the engines finally died, silence fell. A deafening, unnatural silence after the roar of the engines and the storm's fury. Only the hiss of rain on the stones and the rhythmic drone of the surf remained. But there was something wrong with this silence. Eerie. The shore beneath our boots felt strange. Not sand, but black pebbles and sharp fragments of something like volcanic glass. And scattered among them, bleached, deathly pale corals of bizarre shapes. They didn't look like typical Pacific corals. These were gnarled, sharp-edged, some resembling bony fingers reaching from the earth. Under the beams of our tack lights, they cast crooked, dancing shadows. Other debris littered the area. Pieces of rusted metal of indeterminate origin, scraps of tarred rope, blackened planks. It seemed this island was a graveyard for many ships, not just the Prometheus. The air was thick and heavy. The salty tang of the ocean mingled with another smell, a nauseatingly sweet scent of decay, damp earth, and something else. Metallic, like blood, but not quite. It seeped through the damp fabric of my balaclava, scratching at the back of my throat. "Hawkeye perimeter," I ordered softly into my mic. Bell had already taken position on a low boulder, his rifle with its night vision scope scanning the darkness. "Clear, Lieutenant. But it's quiet. Too quiet." His voice was tense. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the rain and the ocean. That wasn't good. A jungle, even at night, even in a storm, should be alive with sound. Here, a dead silence reigned, as if the island itself was holding its breath. The feeling of being watched became almost palpable. Goosebumps prickled my skin, despite the wet gear and adrenaline. "Gadget? Comms?" I asked. "Heavy interference, Lieutenant. The storm and something else. Strange background noise on all frequencies. But I've got a link to the Coronado, for now." Lee nervously tapped his wrist-mounted communicator. "All right, move out, Machete. You take point. Hawkeye, you bring up the rear. Standard formation, 5-meter interval. Lights on low beam. Just enough to see our feet." We moved forward, away from the relative safety of the beach toward the black wall of jungle that began just 20 yards inland. The vegetation was dense, tangled with vines as thick as an arm. Huge, fleshy leaves glistened with moisture, creating a thick canopy that barely let even the meager light of our beams penetrate. Mud squelched underfoot, mixed with rotting leaves. The humidity was near total, making breathing difficult. Every step crunched and rustled, sounds that seemed deafening in the oppressive silence. The smell of decay intensified, joined by a sharp, ammonia-like tinge. Occasionally, gusts of wind carried a faint smell of ozone like before a thunderstorm, though the storm itself seemed to be easing slightly. We moved slowly, cautiously, weapons at the ready. Eyes scanned the darkness ahead and to the sides, ears straining for any suspicious sound. But there were no sounds. Only our own breathing, the patter of raindrops on leaves, and the distant roar of the ocean. This was more unnerving than any scream or gunshot, as if we had intruded into a place where life had long ago yielded to something else. Something dark and silent, just biding its time. I felt the tension mounting in every member of the squad. Even the normally unflappable Diaz moved with a certain animal caution, his head constantly swiveling, trying to sense an unseen threat. We had entered a realm of darkness, and it was already closing its embrace around us. We'd been pushing deeper into the island for about an hour, following what might have been an animal trail, more like a gap in the suffocating green where something large had crashed through the undergrowth. The damp, heavy air pressed down on our lungs. Sweat mingled with rainwater, trickling under our body armor. The silence continued to press in, broken only by the squelch of our boots in the mud and the rustle of disturbed branches. No chirp of crickets, no calls of night birds, not even the scuttling of small rodents. The complete absence of the jungle's usual soundtrack created a vacuum, an emptiness that felt poised to explode into something terrible. Paranoia became our 7th team member. Every snap of a twig underfoot made us jump. Every dancing shadow cast by our flashlight beams seemed like a lurking enemy. I saw Rico Davis nervously lick his lips, his fingers tightening on the grip of his M249. Even Hawkeye, our calmest operator, moved with more tension than usual, his eyes under the NVGs constantly scanning the treetops and dense thickets flanking the trail. Suddenly, Diaz, on point, threw up a clenched fist, the signal to halt and freeze. We instantly melted into the sides of the trail, going low, weapons aimed into the darkness. I strained my ears. Nothing at first. Then I caught it, a faint, intermittent whisper, like wind through dry leaves. But somehow intentional. Not words. More an imitation of speech devoid of meaning but chilling. It drifted from somewhere deeper in the jungle, off to our right. "What was that?" Lee whispered into the comms, his voice trembling slightly. "Quiet," I answered. The whisper stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Dead silence returned. Diaz moved forward slowly, motioning for us to follow. A few yards later, the trail opened into a small clearing. What we saw made our blood run cold. The clearing was trampled down, grass and shrubs crushed flat. Dark, brownish stains, suspiciously like dried blood, dotted the ground. The earth was pitted with strange tracks. They were huge, far larger than the prints of any predator I knew. Three-toed, with deep gouges from claws, they crisscrossed in multiple directions. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the tracks. Amidst these monstrous prints were the clear impressions of standard-issue combat boots and signs of a struggle, broken branches, scraps of fabric resembling uniform material, and several spent 5.56 mm casings. Someone had been here before us, and they had met something horrible. "Lieutenant, look." Evan's voice was strained. He pointed his flashlight at the ground near the edge of the clearing. A smashed field tablet lay there next to a radio similar to those used by scientific expeditions. Nearby, deep scratches scarred the trunk of a tree, as if someone had desperately tried to climb it, fleeing something. Just then, a blood-curdling shriek echoed from the jungle to our left, high-pitched, piercing, full of pain and terror. It cut off abruptly, replaced by a sickening crunch, like large bones breaking. We barely had time to turn before something nightmarish burst out of the dense ferns, snapping branches and scattering earth. It was a mutated wild boar, but twisted beyond recognition. It was the size of a small bear. Its body was covered in sparse, coarse bristles, through which pale, lumpy skin showed, covered in pulsating tumors and sores that emitted a faint, phosphorescent bluish glow. Its legs were unnaturally long and thin, bent at wrong angles, ending in sharp, bony, hoof-like claws. Its snout was elongated, its mouth stretched in a horrific rictus filled with needle-like teeth of varying lengths. But the worst part was the eyes. There were 3 of them, and they burned with a dead blue light, devoid of pupils, and something in its overall structure, in the proportions of its forelimbs, vaguely resembled human arms crudely fused to its body. The remnant of some kind of chain or collar dangled from its neck. The creature uttered a low, gurgling snarl and charged straight at us, ignoring any instinct for self-preservation. "Light it up!" I yelled. The clearing erupted in the roar of gunfire. Our rifles fired in bursts, bullets sparking off the creature's bony growths and tearing through its pale flesh, leaving dark holes that oozed thick, almost black blood with a faint blue luminescence. But the creature didn't seem to feel pain. It kept coming with terrifying speed. Davis opened up with his saw. The heavy 5.56 mm round slammed into the mutant, making it stumble. One burst caught its front leg, shattering the bone with a sickening crunch. The creature shrieked and collapsed, but immediately tried to rise, dragging its mangled limb. It was only yards from Davis. Rico kept pouring fire into it, but in the heat of battle, maybe reloading or shifting position, he got too close. The mutant twisted and lashed out with its remaining intact forelimb, tipped with sharp bony spurs. One shard of bone or claw tore through Davis's pants and into the skin of his thigh, leaving a deep, ragged gash. "Ah, damn it!" Rico swore, stumbling back. In that instant, Diaz was on the downed creature. His machete flashed in the beams of our lights. One powerful, practiced motion severed the mutant's head. The body twitched convulsively a few times and lay still, emitting a foul stench and a faint blue glow from its wounds. Silence fell again on the clearing, broken only by our heavy breathing and the hiss of rain. The smell of gunpowder mingled with the vile stench rising from the corpse. "Rico, you okay?" I asked, moving toward him. "Scratch, Lieutenant. Deep, but nothing major," Davis rasped, wincing in pain. "Doc, check him out," I ordered. Evans quickly knelt beside Rico, cutting away the pant leg. The gash was indeed deep, ragged, and bleeding heavily. "Needs cleaning and stitches," Doc said briskly, pulling out antiseptic and bandages. "Looks like just muscle damage. Lucky." While Evans treated the wound, I approached the decapitated corpse. The blue glow was slowly fading. Diaz poked it with the barrel of his shotgun. "What the hell was that thing, LT?" he asked quietly. "Don't know, Machete, but it's definitely not local fauna." I looked around the clearing at the signs of struggle, at the creature's remains. Looks like the Prometheus crew ran into this, or something like it. First contact made, and it was bloody. We'd lost the element of surprise if we ever had it. Worse, one of us was wounded, a scratch. Evans had treated it by the book, but looking at that thing, its unnaturalness, that eerie blue glow, a bad feeling crept over me. Something was wrong. Very wrong. We had to hurry. After the clash in the clearing, we moved faster, the tension ratcheted up tenfold. Every rustle, every shadow seemed to herald a new attack. Davis's limp slowed us slightly, but he gritted his teeth and pushed on, leaning on his machine gun like a crutch. Evans stayed close, ready to assist. The jungle's silence no longer felt merely eerie. It felt like the calm before another storm, a pause the enemy was taking to regroup. The smell of decay and ozone became a constant companion, acrid and cloying. Finally, through the wall of rain and foliage, we saw it. USNS Prometheus. The sight was grim. The research vessel, easily 150 meters long, lay on its side at the foot of a rocky cliff, clearly driven there by the storm. Its starboard side canted toward the sky at an unnatural angle, its port side almost completely submerged under the murky, churning water of the surf. The hull was mangled, riddled with breaches and tears from impacts with the rocks. Rust was already blooming across the metal in wide patches, as if it had lain here for years, not hours. Waves broke against the steel flank with a dull roar, receding to drag away small bits of debris. The same dead silence that pervaded the jungle hung around the ship. No cries of gulls, no lights, no smoke. Nothing to indicate the presence of survivors. Only the dark, immobile hulk of metal cast away on a hostile shore. The smell of rust and brine mingled here with that same sweetish metallic stench we'd noticed on the beach, but far more concentrated. It seemed to emanate from the ship itself, as if it wasn't just dead, but decaying from within. "Hawkeye, Diaz, perimeter recon," I ordered. "Rest of you cover." While Bell and Diaz moved like ghosts along the jungle's edge, checking the approaches to the vessel, we took positions behind large boulders, covering arcs of fire. Lee deployed his tablet, trying to catch any signal from the ship or boost our link back to the destroyer. "No signs of life, LT," Diaz reported back after a few minutes. "Just tracks around here, same as the clearing. And more spent brass. Looks like there was a fight here too." "Comms are still garbage," Lee added. "Interference is off the charts. Source is nearby. Maybe the ship itself. Picking up weird energy fluctuations, unstable, pulsing. Doesn't look like standard equipment." "All right, we're going in," I decided. "Find the lab module. Cargo Echo is the objective. Lee, try to interface with the ship's systems if you can. Need any intel we can get? Davis, how's the leg?" "Good to go, LT," Rico grunted, though I saw him wince with each shift of weight. We chose the largest breach in the starboard superstructure, which gaped above the waterline like a dark maw. Diaz went first, secured a line. One by one, we climbed the slippery, mangled metal and slipped inside. Inside was dim chaos. Emergency lighting was dead. The only illumination came from our tactical lights, their beams carving scenes of destruction and desolation out of the darkness. We found ourselves in some kind of corridor or common area. Furniture was overturned. Debris littered the deck. Shattered monitors, broken equipment, personal effects like books, mugs, photos in smashed frames. The walls and overhead were spattered with dark stains and streaks of dried blood. Signs of a fierce struggle were obvious. Dents in the metal bulkheads, as if from massive impacts, deep scratches like the ones the creature in the clearing might have left. But there were almost no bodies, just a few fragments barely identifiable in the gloom and vast amounts of blood. Where was the rest of the crew? The question hung unanswered in the heavy air. The air inside was stifling, thick, saturated with that same vile smell of rot, blood, and ozone. Added to it now was the stench of stagnant seawater that had flooded the lower decks. All we could hear was our own breathing, the creak of metal underfoot, and the distant boom of waves hitting the hull outside. Occasionally, odd noises drifted from deeper within the ship. A soft scraping like metal on metal, a short, gurgling sound, a distant moan that could have been the wind whistling through breaches, or maybe something else entirely. "Stick together. Machete, point. Hawkeye, rear guard," I ordered, lowering my voice. The acoustics inside the ship were strange. Every sound echoed down the hollow corridors. "Look for signs to the lab module or cargo bay." We moved forward, carefully picking our way through the debris. Our lights swept the walls, catching signs, evacuation diagrams, cabin numbers. The ship was a maze of dark corridors, passageways, and flooded compartments. On the lower levels, the water was knee-deep, murky, cold, choked with floating trash. Every step in it made an unpleasant sloshing sound that echoed unnervingly in the quiet. Lee fiddled constantly with his gear. "Got a partial schematic from the internal network, LT. It's damaged, but main sections are readable. Lab module, deck below, central section. Main cargo bay should be there too, but the network. It's weird, parasitic signals bouncing around, and the energy readings. They're spiking right around the lab." "Good work, Gadget. Lead the way." We descended deeper into darkness and damp. Claw marks and dried blood became more frequent on the walls. The feeling of a hostile presence grew with every step. It felt like the silence itself was watching us, waiting. Prometheus wasn't just a dead ship. It was a tomb. And maybe the lair of whatever nightmare Cargo Echo had spawned. We were going into the heart of darkness, and I prayed we'd make it out alive. The descent to the lower deck felt like entering the underworld. The temperature dropped noticeably. The air grew even more stagnant and humid, saturated with that vile mix of rot, seawater, and ozone. The water here was almost waist-deep, cold and viscous like a soup of debris and slime. Movement was difficult. We had to literally push through floating wreckage, overturned crates, pieces of hull plating, unidentifiable scientific equipment. The beams of our lights pulled disturbing images from the darkness. Blurry shapes underwater that could have been anything, and long, dark strands of hair waving gently near a wall like seaweed. No one stopped to check what they were attached to. The scraping and distant moaning we'd heard earlier grew louder, more distinct. They emanated from somewhere deeper on this deck, punctuated by gurgling, slurping sounds that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It felt as though the ship were alive with its own horrific internal processes. "Lab module is through the next bulkhead," Lee reported, checking the schematic on his tablet, its screen casting an ethereal glow on his tense face. "Readings show the main source of the energy fluctuations is in there and something else. Biosignatures detected, but they're weird, unstable." "Stand by," I whispered. Diaz nodded and took position by the jammed door leading into the compartment. Machete gripped the handle, ready to yank it on command. Bell covered our rear, his rifle methodically scanning the dark corridor behind us. "Hit it!" Diaz yanked the door open with a grunt. It gave way with a loud, protesting screech. We stormed in, weapons up, flashlight beams sweeping the space. It was a spacious lab, or perhaps a cargo bay converted for research. Complex equipment was everywhere. Centrifuges, DNA sequencers, chemical storage cabinets, large monitors mounted on the walls, now dark and shattered. Everything was overturned, smashed, coated in the same brown muck that covered the rest of the accessible ship. But in the center of the room, secured on a special platform, stood the container. It was huge, the size of a small car, constructed of thick, matte gray metal, covered in complex locking mechanisms and restraint systems. A large international biohazard symbol was painted on its side, along with a stenciled label. Cargo Echo. Top secret. Do not open. But the most alarming feature wasn't the label. The container's surface wasn't monolithic. Fine, web-like cracks spider-webbed across it in several places, leaking a faint pulsing blue light, the exact same light we'd seen in the mutated boar's eyes and wounds. This light filled the compartment with an eerie, sickening radiance, casting long, distorted shadows from the broken equipment. The air here was especially heavy, practically electric, and the smell of ozone was almost unbearable. The blue glow was hypnotic and, at the same time, provoked a deep, irrational sense of dread. "There it is. Cargo Echo," I breathed out. "Doesn't look very sealed, Lieutenant," Evans noted, his eyes fixed on the glowing cracks. His voice was quiet but laced with concern. "Lee, can you scan it? What's inside? And try to find a terminal. Maybe there are logs, reports." "On it." Lee quickly deployed his scanning equipment, aiming sensors at the container. "Energy signature is off the scale. Looks like some form of unstable biological energy. Can't pinpoint it. Inside, something's there, moving. But the scanner can't identify the structure. Data's corrupted." He moved toward an intact-looking terminal against the far wall, connecting his tablet. "Trying to access the Prometheus logs. Network's damaged, but maybe something survived." "Diaz, Bell, Evans, hold perimeter." "Eyes open," I ordered, scanning the compartment. In the far corner, another door stood slightly ajar. A faint scraping sound drifted from it, and then I noticed Davis. He was standing slightly apart, leaning heavily on his machine gun. His breathing was ragged, shallow. He was rubbing his temples, wincing. "Rico, how you doing?" I asked, moving closer. "Head splitting, LT," he muttered. "And the light, too bright." He glanced uneasily at the glowing container, then at the beam of my flashlight. "Turn off the lights, huh?" I dimmed my flashlight beam. "Maybe Doc can give you something for the pain?" "Don't need it," Davis snapped, his voice edged with irritation. "I'm fine, just tired." But his movements were jerky, abrupt. He kept glancing around as if hearing something we couldn't. Evans noticed his state too. He approached, intending to check the bandage on Davis's leg. "Rico, let me see." Rico was straightforward, sometimes hot-headed, but never aggressive toward his own guys. "Easy, Rico," I said placatingly. "Just checking." Just then, Davis snapped his head up, his eyes widening. He stared at the half-open door in the corner of the compartment. "There, do you hear it?" he whispered. We all froze, listening intently. The soft scraping from that direction continued, but nothing else. "What do you hear, Rico?" Diaz asked warily. Whispered, calling. Davis took a step toward the door, his gaze vacant, his eyes gleaming strangely in the container's bluish light. "Davis, hold position," I yelled. But it was too late. Something inside him snapped. I saw his pupils contract to pinpricks. Then the irises flared with the same dead blue light emanating from the container. The first symptoms manifested. And the nightmare was just beginning. A second stretched into eternity. We stared at Davis, frozen by a mixture of horror and disbelief. The blue light in his eyes grew brighter, pulsing in sync with the glow from the cracks in the container. He stopped halfway to the door, his body beginning to tremble violently. "Rico!" Evans called out, his voice cracking, taking a step toward him. "Doc, stay back!" I yelled, instinctively raising my rifle, a cold certainty gripping me that something was terribly wrong. Davis let out a low, guttural sound, not a cry of pain, but more like the growl of a cornered beast. His body arched backward impossibly. There was a sickening, wet crunch, the sound of bones breaking. His fatigues began to rip across his back and shoulders as the muscles underneath bulged unnaturally and twisted. "Oh my God," Lee whispered, backing away toward the terminal. The transformation was fast, brutal, and agonizing. This wasn't the smooth morphing from horror movies. It was a chaotic, asymmetrical dissolution of the human form. Bones snapped with nauseating cracks and immediately began fusing back together at impossible angles. His skin paled, stretched taut, and then tore, revealing pulsating bluish muscle tissue beneath. His spine curved grotesquely, forcing him into a hunched posture. His arms elongated, fingers curling into talons, nails thickening into black, sharp claws that burst through the skin. His jaw thrust forward, teeth lengthening and sharpening into fangs, ripping through his gums with a wet, bloody sound. His face! It still vaguely resembled Davis, but the features were distorted into a mask of non-human agony and fury, the eyes burning with cold blue fire. He grew taller, more stooped, a horrifying hybrid of wolf, primate, and something utterly alien, still retaining fragments of his tactical gear, pieces of body armor embedded in the warped flesh, torn scraps of uniform hanging from bony limbs. The heavy machine gun clattered to the deck from his deforming hands. It all took no more than 10 seconds. 10 seconds of pure, concentrated nightmare. Before us stood not Petty Officer Rico Davis, our teammate, our brother-in-arms. Before us stood a spawn of Echo. The creature let out a deafening roar, a sound thick with fury that echoed violently around the compartment, and lunged. Not at the door, not at the container, at us, at its former comrades. "Fire! Neutralize!" The command tore from my throat before I could fully process the horror. It was Davis. But it wasn't Davis anymore. It was a threat. The compartment exploded in gunfire. We opened up simultaneously. Me, Diaz, Bell. Evans recoiled against the wall, his face white as a sheet. Lee frantically mashed buttons on the terminal, trying not to look. Our rounds struck home, ripping chunks of distorted flesh, leaving smoking wounds that oozed the bluish ichor. But the thing that had been Davis seemed oblivious to the impacts. It moved with incredible speed and strength, using the walls and equipment for cover, leaping with an agility impossible for its now grotesque form. It had clearly retained some of Davis's tactical instincts, making it even more dangerous. It charged Diaz. The chief reacted instantly, firing his shotgun almost point blank. The blast of buckshot slammed into the monster's chest, knocking it back a few feet but failing to stop it. The creature roared and lunged again, raking claws across Diaz's forearm before he could fully evade. Diaz cursed, backing up, firing again. Bell laid down methodical, aimed shots from his rifle, targeting the head. Several rounds struck the skull, but only sparked off the bony ridges that had formed on its brow. The head snapped back, but the attack didn't falter. I fired short bursts, trying to drive the creature back, keep it from reaching Lee or Evans. Fighting in the confined space of the lab was chaotic and deadly. Bullets ricocheted off metal surfaces, the blue light from the container pulsed with increasing intensity, casting lurching, nightmarish shadows. The creature leaped at me. I barely dodged aside, its claws slicing through the air where I'd been a split second before. I fired from the hip, a burst catching it in the side. It howled and spun toward me. In its burning blue eyes, for just an instant I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, pain, or maybe it was just my imagination. Diaz had flanked the creature. While its attention was on me, Diaz stepped in close. His machete flashed again. The heavy blade struck deep into the side of the neck, not a clean decapitation like the boar, but a deep, horrific wound. Blue blood sprayed like a fountain. Simultaneously, Bell fired again. This time the bullet found its mark, hitting one of the burning eyes dead center. The creature gave a final gurgling rattle, twitched violently, and collapsed in a heap at my feet. Its body shuddered a few times and then lay still. The blue glow in its wounds and the remaining eye slowly faded to black. A heavy silence descended on the compartment, broken only by our ragged breathing and the steady drip of water from the ceiling overhead. The smell of blood, human and inhuman, mixed thickly with ozone and rot. We stood over the body of the man who, mere minutes ago, had been our friend. Shock and adrenaline slowly began to recede, replaced by a rising tide of nausea and a hollow emptiness. Evans slowly approached the body, his hands trembling. He knelt, shone his light on the twisted face, then down at the leg wound he had treated less than an hour ago. "The scratch," he whispered, his voice thick with horror. "That thing in the clearing. It infected him. This agent. It's transmitted through wounds, bodily fluids." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear. "Diaz, you were hit too." Diaz looked down at his forearm. 4 deep parallel scratches oozed blood. Without a word, he took a field tourniquet from his pouch and cinched it tight above the wound. His face was like a thundercloud. The realization hit like a sledgehammer. The danger wasn't just outside. It was here, among us. Any scratch, any wound could be a death sentence. We were trapped on a cursed ship with a ticking time bomb. And the bomb wasn't just in the container. It was potentially inside each of us. Losing Davis wasn't just losing a soldier. It was a tragedy that threw our entire mission, our very survival, into terrifying doubt. A heavy silence hung over us as we stared at Davis's mutilated remains. The reality of what had happened slowly seeped through the shock. We'd lost a teammate, and now every one of us was potentially compromised. Diaz silently cleaned his wounded arm with antiseptic, his face an unreadable mask, but I saw the muscles clenching in his jaw. Evans looked lost, his gaze shifting between Davis's body and the glowing container. Bell checked his weapon with grim focus. "Lieutenant, got something." Lee's voice broke the spell. He'd been hunched over the terminal the whole time, fingers flying across his connected tablet. Managed to crack some of the Prometheus's encrypted logs. And I picked up a fragmented transmission from command. Interference is hellish, but I got the gist. We all turned to him, hope warred with dread inside me. What had he found? "Talk to me, Gadget," I ordered. "Cargo Echo. It's not a weapon. Not originally." Lee swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the screen. "It's an experimental bioagent, developed by DARPA under codename Project Prometheus. Designed for accelerated evolution and terraforming. Theoretically, it was supposed to adapt any biosphere, speed regeneration, even rewrite DNA for survival in extreme environments." "Terraforming?" Diaz repeated incredulously. "Like in the movies?" "Looks like it," Lee nodded. "But something went wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The logs mention uncontrolled mutations. The agent proved unstable. It doesn't just adapt. It rewrites life chaotically, aggressively. The crew tried to contain it, but there was a breach. These cracks on the container. Looks like the pressure from inside is building." The picture snapped into focus. A research vessel carrying a secret life-altering agent, a leak, the crew, and apparently the local fauna, transformed into nightmarish mutants. The Boar, Davis, they were victims of an experiment gone horribly wrong. "And the transmission from command?" I asked, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. "They know," Lee said quietly. "Seems they got some data from the Prometheus before contact was lost, or maybe they figured it out from our fragmented reports about contact." "Orders have changed, Lieutenant." He looked me straight in the eye. "New orders. Do not extract. Repeat, do not extract. Mission change to terminate cargo echo at all costs. All costs. Terminate, not retrieve." Command realized the scale of the threat. This agent couldn't be allowed to leave the island. Not in the container, not in the blood of any survivor. We were standing at ground zero of a potential pandemic, one capable of twisting all life on the planet into a grotesque parody. They authorize use of all available means to destroy the container and contain the threat on the island, Lee added, his voice trembling slightly. "Including, well, you understand, sterilization of the site." I understood. If we failed, the next step would be a tactical nuke or something similar dropped on Isla Perdida. We were the last line of defense. "How do we destroy it, Gadget?" I asked, pushing the grim possibilities aside. We had to act. Lee stared back at his tablet. "Based on the container schematics and log data, just blowing it from the outside is risky. Could disperse the agent even further. We need either a high-yield internal charge to guarantee neutralization through heat and pressure, or there's an emergency scuttling system, something like a thermal charge built inside. But activating it requires access to the control panel on the container itself. And it's likely locked down or damaged." "How much plastique do we have?" I asked, turning to Diaz. "Standard loadout of C4. Several bricks. Should be enough for an internal breach if placed right," the chief replied, already assessing the container with the professional eye of a demolitions expert. "Okay. Plan is, Diaz, rig the charge. Lee, try to access the self-destruct system. If it works, we trigger it. If not, we use the C4. Evans, Bell, hold the approaches. I'll cover Diaz." Just then, new sounds erupted from outside, echoing through the dark corridors of the ship and seemingly from the island itself. The low, drawn-out howl we'd heard before, but now multiplied. It was joined by piercing shrieks, the scrape of claws on metal, and deep guttural growls. The sounds were getting closer. "Lieutenant, they're coming," Bell said grimly, peering out into the corridor. "Lots of them. Looks like our noise and the light attracted every goddamn thing out there." The realization hit with renewed force. We weren't just trapped. We were under siege. The island's creatures, spawned by Echo, were converging on our makeshift fortress, and we had to destroy the heart of this nightmare before it consumed us too. The hopelessness of the situation pressed down, but there was no time for despair. We had to fight for our lives, and maybe, just maybe, for the whole world. Chaos descended swiftly, mercilessly. The sounds outside swelled into a deafening cacophony. Shrieks, roars, the grating screech of claws on metal, heavy thuds against the bulkheads. It sounded like the whole damned island had come alive and was clawing its way in. The blue light from the container pulsed at the center of the lab like a malevolent heart, illuminating the scene of our last stand. Bell hugged the doorway, laying down fire into the shadows flitting down the corridor. The explosive roar of his rifle blended with the pounding from beyond the walls, a continuous raging din. I moved up beside him, taking a position. Diaz and Lee were working frantically. Seconds felt like an eternity, time was running out. They had to make this count. Diaz was already at the container. One hand clamped his makeshift bandage to his forearm. The other moved with swift, methodical precision, placing bricks of C4 against the metal surface, connecting them with det cord. His face was taut with concentration, not a flicker of fear showing. Pure, cold professionalism in the face of oblivion. Lee's fingers flew across his tablet, still jacked into the container's control panel. "Trying to bypass security. Access codes are corrupted, but there's a backdoor. Almost got it," he exclaimed. "Self-destruct system is active. But the timer's damaged. I can't set a delay. Initiation is immediate on confirmation." "How long is the destruct cycle?" I yelled over the racket, firing a short burst at a creature trying to squeeze through a ruptured section of the wall. "Unknown seconds, maybe minutes. It's an emergency protocol, probably a fast thermal charge," Lee shouted back. "Screw it! Diaz, prep the C4 as backup. If the system fails or takes too long, we blow it manually." The assault began in earnest. They weren't just the humanoid mutants resembling Davis, former crew members twisted beyond recognition, retaining only shreds of clothing and monstrous strength. Other spawn of Echo joined the fray. From ventilation shafts and holes torn in the overhead, creatures like huge, crazed bats or harpies dropped down, with leathery, tattered wings, bony spurs on their claws, and multiple glowing blue eyes. They swooped and dove, aiming for our faces, their shrieks splitting the air. From the flooded corridor we'd entered through, long, serpentine things slithered forth, bodies segmented, propelled by numerous thin, spider-like legs, their maws lined with needle-sharp teeth. They moved with unnerving speed and silence through the water and up the walls, their blue eyes tracking our every move. And judging by the force of the impacts shaking the hull, larger things were trying to break in from outside. Perhaps mutated island predators, or even something that had crawled out of the ocean depths. We fought in a desperate 360-degree defense. Bell methodically dropped targets in the corridor. I covered the main entrance and the breaches in the walls, Diaz adding shotgun blasts when he could spare a hand from the explosives. Evans, having overcome his initial shock, had grabbed his sidearm and spare mags, firing up at the winged horrors descending from above. A serpentine creature had slithered unnoticed along the wall and launched itself at Lee from behind. He cried out, stumbling to the deck as the thing coiled around him, its fanged mouth snapping near his throat. His tablet clattered away. "Lee!" I swung my rifle around and fired a long burst into the creature's segmented body, trying not to hit Gadget. Blue ichor sprayed everywhere. The creature convulsed and loosened its grip. Lee scrambled away, gasping, his face etched with terror. "Thanks, LT." "Diaz, charge ready?" "Ready! Detonator wired, on your command!" "Lee, self-destruct, go or no go?" Lee snatched up his tablet, checked the connection. "Ready to activate, Lieutenant, one tap." At that moment, a huge section of the bulkhead next to Bell blew inward with a deafening shriek of tortured metal. A monstrous clawed hand, covered in thick rough hide and tipped with 3 enormous talons, reached through the ragged opening. It was followed by a snarling muzzle resembling a bear's, but filled with multiple rows of razor teeth, its eyes burning with blue fire. The creature's claw shot out, clamped around Bell's leg, and yanked him through the opening with incredible force. We heard a brief, choked cry, then a horrific crunching sound. Bell was gone. Our sniper, our eyes and ears, vanished. Rage, raw and blinding, flooded me. Lee slammed his finger onto the tablet screen. The panel on the container flashed bright red, then shifted back to intense blue. A rising, low hum began to emanate from within. Creatures poured in from everywhere. The breach where Bell had disappeared became the main entry point. We fell back toward the main door, laying down a storm of suppressing fire. Evans covered Lee. Diaz brought up the rear, his hand hovering over the C4 detonator, ready to trigger it if the self-destruct failed. The hum from the container intensified, climbing in pitch, becoming almost physically painful. The metal began to glow, not just at the cracks, but across its entire surface, turning a dull cherry red. The temperature in the compartment spiked dramatically. Behind us, there was a deafening, compressed roar, and the laboratory lit up with a blinding white-blue light that pulsed out even through the doorway. It was followed by a powerful wave of searing heat that washed over our backs. The system had worked. Cargo Echo was being destroyed, but now we had to get the hell off this cursed ship and off the island. And judging by the chorus of inhuman sounds echoing from the corridors ahead, it was going to be one hell of a race for survival. Bell was gone. I prayed he would be the last. The explosion inside the lab wasn't deafening so much as consuming. A blinding flash of white-blue light, a wave of searing heat that rolled down the corridor, and a low, vibrating hum that seemed to shake the very structure of the ship. The light momentarily swallowed all shadows, highlighting the grotesque silhouettes of creatures in the corridor, frozen for a split second before the energy wave hit them. Some burst into flames like torches. Others shrieked and recoiled, their own blue luminescence flickering and dying. The path back up was a nightmare. The ship groaned and protested, seemingly in its death throes after the internal detonation. Bulkheads had warped from the intense heat in places. The corridors filled with acrid smoke and the stench of burnt flesh. Both mutant and, presumably, whatever had been inside the container. The ship's emergency systems, if any still functioned, remained stubbornly silent. The creatures hadn't vanished. Maybe the blast had wiped out those in the immediate vicinity, but others, drawn by the commotion and the light, continued to crawl from every dark recess. We fought our way through them with fire and speed. Adrenaline surged, overriding fear and exhaustion. We operated on pure instinct, honed by years of training. Cover, move, reload, fire, over and over. We'd lost Bell, we'd lost Davis. 4 of us remained, and every one of us knew that getting out alive wasn't just the mission anymore. It was a long shot, a goddamn miracle. Finally, we reached the breach in the hull we'd entered through. Outside, the rain still fell, but the storm had clearly eased. The sky to the east was beginning to lighten. Pre-dawn twilight painted the clouds in dirty violet hues. The fresh, salty air, after the fetid stench inside the ship, felt intoxicating. "To the R-Ibes! Move!" I commanded, jumping down onto the slippery rocks below. But the island wasn't letting us go that easily. The jungle, which had been merely silent and eerie before, now swarmed with movement. Creatures crawled from beneath tree roots, dropped from vines, their multiple blue eyes burning like cold fire in the pre-dawn gloom. It seemed destroying echo had stirred the hornet's nest, driving them all out into the open. The path to the beach became a desperate sprint through ambushes. We fired almost non-stop, magazines emptying at an alarming rate. One of the harpy-like creatures dove at Evans, sinking claws into his shoulder. He cried out, but managed to put a pistol round through its head. I helped him up while Diaz and Lee laid down, covering fire. We had almost reached the beach when our path was blocked by the massive, bear-like mutant that had taken Bell. It stood planted in the middle of the trail, blocking passage with its hulking, distorted body, roaring, its multi-road maw gaping wide. A scrap of Bell's camouflage was still clutched in one of its massive claws. He ordered the team to split up. Lee and Evans were to head left toward the water while he and Diaz would try to draw the creature away. But Diaz refused. His voice was like steel as he insisted the lieutenant take the others and leave him behind. There was no fear in his eyes, only grim determination. He made it clear it was an order from a chief. He also told him to take care of his arm if he managed to get out alive. He was talking about the scratches. He knew he might not have much time even if he survived the fight. There was a real possibility he was already infected. The lieutenant hesitated only for a heartbeat. Everything he'd been taught, every rule, every instinct, screamed against leaving a man behind. But Diaz had already made his choice. He was sacrificing himself to give the rest of them a chance. The lieutenant started to say something, but Diaz was already stepping forward, raising his shotgun and drawing his machete. He let out a feral battle cry to draw the creature's attention. The lieutenant grabbed Lee and Evans and led them toward the boats. There was no time left. We sprinted toward the beach, forcing ourselves not to look back. Behind us erupted the monster's enraged roar, the heavy boom of shotgun blasts, and Diaz's furious war cry. Then came the sounds of a brutal struggle, a sickening crunch, and then silence. Tears of rage and helplessness burned my eyes, but I didn't stop. We reached the RIBs hidden beneath the rocks. My hands trembled as I tore away the camouflage netting and checked the engine. Lee helped the wounded Evans into the boat. The engine roared to life on the third try. We shoved the RIB into the surf and scrambled aboard. I cast one last look back at the shore. No sign of Diaz or the monster. Just the dark, brooding jungle and the shattered hulk of the Prometheus. A thin column of smoke still rising from its breached hull into the damp air. We sped away from the cursed island at maximum throttle, leaving a foaming white wake on the gray water. The rain stopped, and the dawn began to break properly. But the rising sun seemed dim and cold. We raised the Coronado on the emergency comms. A recovery helo was already inbound. When they winched us aboard the destroyer, we were running on empty. Wounded, exhausted, haunted, having lost 2 brothers. I was immediately summoned to debrief with Wallace via secure video link. I stood in a sterile officer's cabin, still in my soaked, filth-caked gear. The commander's face appeared on the screen, impassive. Lieutenant Cole, report. Sir, my voice was raspy, distant. Cargo echo terminated. Confirm activation of internal self-destruct system. Target site, the lab, completely destroyed by thermal charge. Casualties? Wallace asked flatly, no emotion in his voice. 2, sir. Petty Officer Davis and Chief Diaz. KIA? I didn't elaborate on Davis's transformation or Diaz's sacrifice. That would stay with us. The survivors. Acknowledged, Lieutenant. Your team performed effectively. Threat neutralized. Sir, I hesitated. I should tell him. About Diaz's scratch. Evans's wound from the harpy. About the gnawing uncertainty that the threat was truly contained. What if the agent could spread other ways? What if something had survived the thermal charge or escaped the island? I looked down at my own hands, at the grime under my nails, the small cuts and scrapes acquired in the chaos, but the words caught in my throat. I saw Wallace's eyes. He needed to hear it was over, that the world was safe. And maybe it was. Maybe the sacrifices hadn't been in vain. Maybe the containment had held. Nothing, sir. Mission complete. Dismissed, Lieutenant. Get some rest. The screen went dark. I was left alone in the silence of the cabin. Mission complete. Threat neutralized, but looking at my hands, at my own grimy reflection in the dark porthole, I felt no relief. Only the cold, sticky residue of horror and a gnawing, persistent doubt. The echo of Prometheus had been silenced. But was it gone for good? Or had we just bought the world sometime before the next nightmare crawled out of the dark? I didn't know, and I was afraid to find out. The world was safe, for now.